Okay, guys, in this video, we're going to talk about something called conditional statements. And it's kind of going off the similar format that we talked about with the last video. So a conditional statement is a statement that is written in if-then form. So it's a statement like kind of like an observation or a conclusion that you reach, but in a if-then form. And the statement that comes after the word if is what we call the hypothesis. And the statement that comes after the word then is what we call the conclusion. So we're going to talk a little bit about what conditional statements are, as well as the counterexamples and some different versions of a conditional statement that we're going to need to know to be able to do the project next week. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example of a conditional statement. So if we zoom in here, an example of this, and this is the one that I'm going to use, is, and we're going to use this for all the different versions of a conditional, but that is, we want to say if an animal, we're going to say if an animal, actually let me do this in a different color here. So we're going to say if an animal is a bird, okay, then it will fly. Okay, so then, we say then it will fly. Okay, so we can say that a conditional is an if-then statement. So let's use an example here. We're going to say if, that's a little too big here. Let me go ahead and erase this. We're going to say if, still a little too big. Okay. Okay, that's a little bit better. We're going to say if a animal, or if an animal is a bird, then it will fly. Okay, so we say then it will fly. So that's what we call actually, let's clean that up a little bit. Okay, so that's what we call a conditional statement, right? Because it has a statement after if and then a statement after then. Now let's go ahead and talk about a counterexample. We talked about it with the last video, but now let's talk a little bit more. It's an example that proves a statement to be false. So an example of this would be an example that we can provide to say that this is false, that an animal that is a bird can fly, or cannot fly, excuse me. So an example here would be a penguin. Okay, a penguin or an ostrich. Okay, these are birds that cannot fly. So we say they are birds, but can't fly. So that is what we call a counterexample, because we just proved that these two birds prove that that statement is false, the previous one. Okay, so that's how we decide if a statement is true or not. I mean, a statement is false or not, if you can provide a counterexample. Now we're going to talk about what's called the hypothesis and conclusion. So what comes after the word if is what we call the hypothesis. That's kind of what we, I guess you could say, a observation that you make that is not tested. That's what we call the hypothesis. Conclusion is what we have found based on the results of a tested hypothesis. So conclusion is what follows the word then. Okay, so we say if something, then something. So let's start off with an original conditional. So that's always how we do the original version is if P, then Q, where P is the hypothesis, Q is the conclusion. An example of that would be, let's go ahead and use our previous statement that we were using earlier about the birds can or cannot fly. So an example of this would be if an animal is a bird, okay, is a bird, then it will fly. Okay, so we could say that the statement after the word if, in this case, statement after the word if, so the animal is a bird, is going to be the hypothesis. And the statement after the word then, right, then it will fly, is the conclusion. So there is your P and there is your Q. So keep that in mind, because these are going to change as we keep moving forward. So the next one I want to talk about is what's called the converse. This is where we flip the P and the Q. So we flip the hypothesis and conclusion. And so our statement, and let's go ahead and write this. So it's a change of the order to the conditional. But what we get here is, let's go ahead and write this. It's going to be if, we say if it will fly, then the animal is a bird. Okay, so if it will fly, then the animal is a bird. So what it is, it's a flip of the hypothesis and conclusion. So now we can write this. We're going to say the statement after the word if is now the conclusion based on the original conditional. And then now the animal is a bird is now your hypothesis. So we're just flipping the order of the P and the Q. Okay, so that's what we call a converse. The next one we're going to talk about is what's called the inverse. Okay, that's where we basically negate, and negate is this kind of, well, this is the notation for negation, but negation is just saying the opposite of the hypothesis and conclusion. So it's saying the opposite of it. So if it's basically using the word not, or just saying is not, is kind of what we call the negation. Those are the key words there. But the symbols for that is these wave lines. Okay, these wave lines right here, that is the notation for it. This indicates that, or this refers to a negation. So again, it's just saying the opposite. So an example here, let's go ahead and look at this one. An example would be to say, and we're going to go back to our original. Again, always remember that you start from your original conditional to create these new ones. But if we start from the original, we're going to say, if an animal is not, that's the key word, not a bird, okay, if the animal is not a bird, then we say, then it will not fly, right? Then it will not fly. Okay, so that's what we call the inverse. Okay, so it's the negation of both the hypothesis and conclusion. So let's go ahead and box this up. And we're going to use this symbol here. We're going to say the opposite of P and then the opposite of Q. Okay, so we're saying we're negating these, then we're saying the opposite of these. And now let's go ahead and take a look at this last one. It's called the contrapositive. So this is where we basically say the opposite of the converse. Okay, so if this, in this example, we're going to go back to our original conditional. So now we're going to flip it, and we're going to say if it will not fly. Okay, if it will not fly, then the animal is not a bird. Okay, so then the animal is not a bird. Okay, so this is just saying the opposite of basically the converse, right? So now here we can go ahead and label this. We're going to say the opposite of Q, because now this is your Q up front, and then the opposite of the P, which is your hypothesis, right? Then, actually, you know what? I'm going to draw it down here. We're going to say this is the opposite of Q, or excuse me, P. All right? Okay, we're going to say opposite of P. Okay, guys, so that pretty much concludes this video, and y'all can use this to help you on the assignment. All right, thank y'all.